Hello and welcome. If you're here tonight, there's a good chance you've felt it. That quiet worry that sometimes shows up at 3 in the morning. The one that asks, will my money last as long as I do? It's one of the most common fears people face in the second half of life. And tonight, we're going to sit with that fear together. Not to make it bigger, but to understand it. To look at it clearly, calmly, and with compassion. My name is Robert. I'm 52 years old. And I want you to know something right away. I think about this too. The fear of outliving my money isn't something I've figured out perfectly. It's something I'm walking through, just like you might be. So tonight isn't a lecture, it's a conversation. One friend to another, exploring a question that matters deeply to both of us. Before we go any further, let me say this. If you're someone who's been carrying this worry for a while, you're not alone. Surveys show that more Americans fear outliving their savings than they fear death itself. Think about that for a moment. The prospect of running out of money feels, to many of us, more frightening than the end of life. That tells us something important. This isn't a small worry. This isn't irrational. This is one of the deepest anxieties of our time. And if you feel it, you're in very good company. Now, if you're new to this channel, welcome. Wealth Work Wisdom is a space for people in the second half of life. People who are thinking about retirement or already in it. People who want to explore the psychology of money with depth and calm. We're not here to hype anything or to create urgency. We're here to think together, slowly and carefully. If that resonates with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. And if you find value in what we talk about tonight, a like helps others find this content too. But truly, no pressure. You're welcome here whether you click anything or not. What matters most is that you're here and that we're thinking about this together. Now I want to invite you to settle in. This video is designed as a sleep video, which means it's long, it's gentle, and it's meant to accompany you as you rest. You don't have to stay awake for all of it. In fact, I hope you don't. If your mind drifts, if your eyes get heavy, if you fall asleep halfway through, that's perfect. This content will be here tomorrow, if you want to come back to it. For now, just let yourself be here. Let your body find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow down, just a little. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just you and this quiet time and these thoughts we're about to explore. Tonight's topic is the fear of outliving your money. It's a fear that touches so many of us, whether we talk about it or not. And what we're going to do is this. First, we'll look at what this fear actually is. The psychology behind it, the biases that shape it, and why it feels so intense. Then we'll turn to the numbers. How long does retirement actually last? Who really runs out of money? What do the statistics tell us once we strip away the stories and the headlines? After that, we'll explore a paradox. Many people who fear outliving their money the most end up dying with substantial assets. Why does that happen? What does it tell us about ourselves? Then we'll hear from the experts. Researchers who've spent decades studying retirement income. What do they recommend? What tools exist to manage this fear? We'll also look at history. How did we get here? Why is this fear so modern? And finally, we'll come to a place of rest. Not false reassurance, but genuine peace. Peace that comes from understanding, from preparation, and from self-compassion. So take a deep breath with me. Let your shoulders drop. And let's begin. Part 2. The anatomy of the fear. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night with a knot in your stomach, worrying about money, you know how this fear feels. It's not abstract, it's visceral. It can make your chest tight, your thoughts race, your whole body tense. And one of the first steps in managing any fear is to understand what it actually is. So let's start there. What is this fear really? In the clinical and research literature, this fear doesn't have its own specific diagnosis. It's not a phobia in the technical sense. Instead, it's understood as a form of financial anxiety. More specifically, it's often called longevity risk perception. The worry that you might outlive your resources. This type of anxiety combines elements of generalized anxiety, which is worry about uncertain future threats, with something called loss aversion. Loss aversion is a well-studied cognitive bias. It means that we feel potential losses much more intensely than equivalent gains. Losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good. And when it comes to retirement, the potential loss we're imagining is enormous. Not just money, but security, dignity, independence. So the fear makes sense. It's not irrational. It's deeply human. Now, this fear doesn't show up the same way for everyone. It changes as we age. If you're in your early 50s, like I am, the fear tends to be more abstract and planning-oriented. We worry about whether we're saving enough. We look at market volatility and wonder if our portfolio can handle it. We ask ourselves, will I actually be able to retire, or will I need to work longer? It's a future-focused anxiety. But as people move into their mid-60s and 70s, the fear becomes more concrete and behavioral. Now the questions shift. How much can I safely withdraw this year? What if healthcare costs spike? What if the market drops just when I need to sell? And many people respond by cutting spending, delaying purchases, or moving more money into cash, even when they don't technically need to. Researchers have noticed this pattern. In your 50s and early 60s, the question is, will I be able to retire? In your late 60s and 70s, the question becomes, how long will this money last? And that shift matters because it changes how the fear feels and how we respond to it. There's also a behavioral response that researchers see sometimes, especially in people who feel they're behind. Some individuals, rather than becoming overly cautious, swing in the other direction. They take on excessive risk, trying to make up for lost time or perceived shortfalls. It's a kind of financial desperation. And unfortunately, it rarely works out well. Now let's talk about the cognitive biases that shape this fear. Because our brains, as wonderful as they are, don't always assess risk accurately. We have mental shortcuts, evolved over millennia, that helped us survive as a species. But those same shortcuts can distort our perception of financial risk in retirement. One of the biggest is called availability bias. Availability bias means that we judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can recall examples of it. If you can think of a vivid story, your brain assumes it's common. So when we hear about someone who lost everything in retirement, that story sticks with us. It feels representative, even if statistically it's an outlier. The same thing happens with market crashes. We remember 2008. We remember the dot-com bubble. And because those memories are vivid, we overestimate the chance they'll happen again soon. Another bias at play is recency bias. Whatever happened recently feels more important than it statistically is. If there's been a market downturn in the last year or two, we assume downturns are the norm. If inflation has spiked recently, we assume it will stay high forever. Our brains overweight the immediate past. Then there's loss aversion, which we touched on earlier. The pain of losing feels about twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining. This is why even modest market drops can cause so much anxiety in retirement. We're not just losing money on paper. We're losing our sense of security, and that hurts deeply. There's also something called the endowment effect. Once we own something, we value it more highly than we did before we owned it. So the money we've saved feels precious. Spending it, even on things we need or enjoy, can feel like a loss. It's why so many retirees struggle to actually use their savings. And one more, affective forecasting or impact bias. This is our tendency to overestimate how bad we would feel in a negative scenario. We imagine running low on money, and we picture catastrophe. But research shows that people are more resilient and adaptable than they predict. Even in genuinely difficult circumstances, most people find ways to cope. Now, not all biases amplify fear. Some work in the opposite direction. Optimism bias, for example, can lead people to underestimate longevity or healthcare costs. They think, that won't happen to me. And status quo bias, The preference for keeping things as they are can prevent people from making needed changes, like buying an annuity or adjusting their withdrawal rate. Inertia feels comfortable, even when it's risky. The point here is not to criticize these biases. They're part of being human. But understanding them gives us a little distance, a little space to ask, is my fear proportionate to the actual risk, or is my brain amplifying it? And that question, even without a perfect answer, can be calming. This fear of outliving our money doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to other retirement anxieties. Health uncertainty, for example. Many people worry not just about running out of money, but about catastrophic healthcare costs. What if I need long-term care? What if there's a medical emergency? These worries feed directly into longevity risk. Because if your health deteriorates unexpectedly, it can deplete your savings very quickly. Then there's job insecurity and retirement timing. People who feel financially shaky often delay retirement, not because they love their work necessarily, but because they're afraid. Afraid their savings won't be enough. Afraid the market will crash the year they retire. And surveys show that financial insecurity is associated with higher levels of depression and stress as people approach retirement age. So this isn't just about money. It's about identity, purpose, health, and dignity, all intertwined. When researchers ask retirees about their main financial stressors, they list things like market volatility, inflation, and whether their income will be adequate. But underneath all of those is the same core fear. What if the money runs out? It's the thread that connects them all. There are also important gender differences in how this fear shows up. Women report higher levels of worry about outliving their savings than men do. And this isn't just psychology. It reflects real structural differences. Women, on average, live longer than men. A 65-year-old woman today can expect to live to around 85, compared to 82 for men. And many women live well into their 90s. Longer life means more years to fund. But women also tend to have lower lifetime earnings. Career interruptions for caregiving, whether for children or aging parents, are more common among women. And on average, women are more likely to experience widowhood, which can mean managing finances alone, sometimes for the first time, later in life. Surveys show that roughly 60% or more of people fear outliving their savings. But women are consistently several percentage points more likely to express this concern. And they're also less likely to have formal retirement plans. Behaviorally, women tend to be more risk-averse in financial matters. This can be a strength. It can mean more stable portfolios and less exposure to volatility. But it can also mean lower expected returns over the long run, which paradoxically increases the worry about sufficiency. So gender isn't just a footnote here. It's a key dimension of how this fear is experienced. Now, let's talk about how this fear has evolved historically. Because interestingly, this intense anxiety about outliving money is relatively modern. In earlier generations, life expectancy after 65 was shorter. People didn't expect to live as long in retirement. And more importantly, many workers had defined benefit pensions. A pension that paid a set amount every month for life. You couldn't outlive it because it was guaranteed. There was also more reliance on family support. Multi-generational living was more common. If you ran low on money, your children might help. Or you might live with them. Today, most of us are in a very different situation. We have 401ks and IRAs, not pensions. We're responsible for managing our own investments and withdrawals. And we're living longer, which means funding more years. So longevity risk, the risk of outliving our assets, has shifted from institutions and families onto individuals. It's now our problem to solve. And that creates a kind of existential anxiety. Surveys even show that more people fear running out of money than fear death itself. Think about that. The prospect of living without resources, of losing independence, of becoming a burden, feels worse than the end of life. That tells us how deep this fear goes. Gerontology and pension economics researchers describe longevity risk as a mass concern of the modern age. Improvements in survival past 65, combined with the erosion of guaranteed lifetime income, have made planning for an uncertain future emotionally overwhelming. Our parents or grandparents may have worried about money, but not quite in this way. They had more certainty, even if they had less wealth. We have more wealth, on average, but far less certainty. And certainty, it turns out, matters a great deal for peace of mind. So here's what we've explored so far. This fear of outliving our money is not a personal failing. It's a predictable response to a modern financial reality. It has a psychological structure. It's shaped by cognitive biases, like availability bias, recency bias, and loss aversion. It manifests differently at different ages. More abstract in our 50s, more concrete and urgent in our 70s. It's more intense for women, for understandable structural reasons. And it's historically new, a product of longer lives and the shift from pensions to individual accounts. Understanding all of this doesn't make the fear disappear, but it does something important. It gives us perspective. It helps us see that we're not alone, we're not irrational, and we're not broken. We're human beings navigating a genuinely uncertain situation with imperfect mental tools. And that's okay. In fact, that's exactly where we need to start. With self-compassion. with the knowledge that this fear, while uncomfortable, makes sense, and with the willingness to look at it honestly, without shame. Part 3. The numbers behind the worry. Now let's turn to the statistics. Because one of the most helpful things we can do when we're anxious is to ground ourselves in data. Not to eliminate uncertainty, which is impossible, but to get a clearer sense of the actual landscape. How long does retirement really last? Who actually runs out of money, and how often? What do the numbers tell us? Let's start with life expectancy. Because the whole question of outliving our money depends on how long we're likely to live. The latest US life tables from the CDC show that a 65-year-old man today can expect to live, on average, another 17 years. That takes him to about age 82. A 65-year-old woman can expect to live another 19.7 years. That's roughly age 85. Now these are averages, which means half of people live longer and half live less long. But the key point is that many people reaching 65 today will live into their late 80s or even their 90s. That's a long time to fund. And it's one of the reasons this fear feels so pressing. If you retire at 65 and you live to 90, that's 25 years. A full quarter century of needing income without a paycheck. And here's another important piece of context. Life expectancy at 65 has increased significantly over the past 50 years. Back in the 1970s and 80s, a 65-year-old could expect roughly 13 to 15 additional years. Today, it's closer to 17 to 20. So we're living longer retirements than previous generations. And that means our savings have to stretch further. Now, with that context, let's ask the harder question. What percentage of retirees actually outlive their money? This is where things get interesting and a little complicated. Because the answer depends on how you define running out. The Employee Benefit Research Institute, EBRI, has a sophisticated model that projects retirement security. They estimate that there's a retirement savings shortfall in the US of about $3.7 trillion. That's the gap between what households aged 35 to 64 have saved and what they'll need to cover basic expenses in retirement. In their framework, they categorize households as at risk if their projected resources won't cover basic needs at some point. And depending on age, marital status, and whether they have pension coverage, roughly 40 to 50% of households fall into this at-risk category. Now, let's be clear. That doesn't mean 40 to 50% of people literally run out of money and end up destitute. It means they're projected to face a period where they can't maintain their standard of living without adjustments. Maybe they cut spending. Maybe they move in with family. Maybe they rely more heavily on Social Security. So it's not catastrophe for everyone, but it is financial stress. and it's a substantial minority. But here's the paradox, and we'll dive deeper into this later. Many retirees who fear running out of money die with substantial assets still intact. EBRI's data shows that over the first 18 to 20 years of retirement, the median retiree spends down only a fraction of their savings. For people who started retirement with less than $200,000 in financial assets, the median spend down was about 25%. For those who started with $200,000 to $500,000, it was about 27%. And for those with $500,000 or more, it was only 11.8%. Think about that. People are holding on to their money, even in retirement. They're spending conservatively, often far more conservatively than they need to. And many die with significant wealth left over. So the picture that emerges is complicated. Yes, a significant portion of households are at risk of shortfalls. But many who have adequate resources don't actually use them. They're so afraid of running out that they deprive themselves of things they could afford. It's a kind of self-imposed austerity driven by fear. Now let's talk about costs. Because one of the big unknowns in retirement is healthcare. Milliman, a well-known actuarial firm, estimates that a healthy 65-year-old retiring in 2024 will spend about $281,000 on healthcare over their lifetime if they're a man, and about $320,000 if they're a woman. That's assuming they have Medicare, a Medigap policy, and Part D drug coverage. It's a lot of money. And it reflects the fact that women live longer and therefore accumulate more years of medical expenses. Now here's something important. If you retire before 65, before you're eligible for Medicare, your healthcare costs go up dramatically. Retiring at 60 instead of 65 can increase your lifetime healthcare expenses by 56 to 86%, depending on your coverage. On the flip side, if you delay retirement to 70, you can reduce healthcare costs by about 29 to 30% compared to retiring at 65. So retirement timing has real financial consequences. And these figures don't even include long-term care, which we'll talk about more later. But the point is, healthcare is a major variable in the longevity risk equation. And it's one of the things we have the least control over. There's also something researchers call the longevity risk premium. It's not a formal fee you pay, but it's a real cost nonetheless. It's the extra years you work and the extra money you save because you're uncertain about how long you'll live. If you knew for certain you'd live to exactly 85, you could plan precisely. But you don't know. So you save more, just in case. You delay retirement, just in case. You cut spending in retirement, just in case. Academic studies show that uncertainty about lifespan leads people to accumulate more wealth than they would under a known horizon. They're effectively paying a premium in the form of additional work and foregone consumption to ensure against the possibility of living a very long time. And that premium is substantial. It can add years to your working life and tens of thousands of dollars to your savings goal. But here's the thing. It's not irrational. Given the uncertainty, it's a reasonable response. The question is whether we're paying more of a premium than we need to. And that's where thoughtful planning can help. Let's also look at how long retirement actually lasts on average. With the typical retirement age in the low 60s and life expectancy at 65 in the high teens, most people experience a retirement of about 18 to 20 years. But many will live longer. If you retire at 62 and live to 90, that's 28 years. Nearly 3 decades without a paycheck. And here's a key historical shift. Life expectancy at 65 has risen, but the average retirement age hasn't risen nearly as much. So retirement is lasting longer than it used to. Our parents' generation might have worked until 65 and lived another 10 or 15 years. Today, people are retiring at similar ages, but living 5 or more years longer. That extended horizon is one reason longevity risk feels so central now. Now I want to pause here and take stock of what these numbers are telling us. First, we're living longer, which is a gift. But it does mean funding more years. Second, a significant minority of households are at risk of shortfalls. But many of those who are adequately resourced don't actually spend what they could. Third, healthcare is expensive and unpredictable. And fourth, we're all paying a kind of invisible premium in the form of extra caution. These numbers paint a complex picture. Not a simple one, but a real one. And understanding the complexity is actually more calming than pretending it's simple. Now let's look at spending patterns in retirement, because this is where things get really interesting. EBRI has tracked how retirees actually use their money over time. And what they've found challenges a lot of assumptions. Many people assume that retirees steadily draw down their savings, a little bit each year, until eventually the money is gone. But that's not what typically happens. In reality, most retirees spend very conservatively. They hold on to their money. Over the first 18 to 20 years of retirement, people with modest savings, let's say under $200,000, spend down a median of only about 25%. So 3/4 of their money is still there after nearly 2 decades. For those with $200,000 to $500,000, the median spend down is about 27%. And for those who enter retirement with $500,000 or more, it's only about 12%. They're barely touching it. Think about what this means. People are so worried about running out that they don't allow themselves to use what they have. even when they could afford to spend more comfortably. Pfau also did a survey asking retirees about their spending intentions, and only about 43% said they planned to spend down all their assets in retirement. The rest intended to preserve balances for emergencies, for bequests, or just for the psychological comfort of having a cushion. But here's the contradiction. Many of these same people also report being worried about outliving their money. So they're simultaneously afraid of running out and choosing not to spend. It's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in reverse. The fear keeps them safe, but it also keeps them from enjoying what they worked so hard to build. Recent survey data shows that more retirees are now saying they feel like they're overspending relative to what they can afford. There's a growing sense of financial strain, particularly with inflation. But even so, the actual asset accumulation data shows that most people die with substantial wealth. So there's a disconnect between how people feel and what the numbers show. And that disconnect is important because it suggests that the fear itself may be disproportionate to the actual risk for many people. Now, I'm not saying the fear is unfounded. For some people, the risk is real, especially for those without pensions, without much savings, or with health challenges. But for others, the fear may be doing more harm than good. It may be preventing them from living fully in the present, from taking that trip, from helping a grandchild, from simply enjoying a nice meal without guilt. So what do we take from all these numbers? First, retirement is lasting longer than it used to, which is both a blessing and a challenge. We get more years, but we need to fund them. Second, a significant portion of people are at risk of shortfalls. But many who have adequate resources don't use them because of fear. Third, healthcare costs are substantial and unpredictable, and they're one of the biggest variables in retirement planning. Fourth, we collectively pay a huge premium in anxiety, extra work, and foregone enjoyment because we don't know how long we'll live. And finally, there's a paradox at the heart of all this. Many of the people who fear outliving their money the most are the ones who end up dying with it still in the bank. Which brings us to our next section. Part 4, the paradox. Why we die with money we feared to spend. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of retirement psychology, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Here's the paradox. We're terrified of running out of money. We lose sleep over it. We make sacrifices because of it. And yet, when researchers look at what actually happens, many people die with substantial assets. Sometimes more than they started retirement with, even accounting for inflation. So the very fear that keeps us up at night leads us to hoard more than we need. And we never get to enjoy the security we worked so hard to create. Why does this happen? Let's explore. The first reason is what economists call precautionary saving. We save extra, beyond what we think we'll need, as insurance against worst-case scenarios. What if the market crashes? What if I need expensive medical care? What if I live to 100? These are legitimate concerns. So we build in a buffer, and then another buffer on top of that. And we tell ourselves we'll relax once we feel secure. But for many people, that feeling of security never quite arrives, because there's always another what-if scenario to worry about. This is loss aversion in action. The pain of potentially losing money feels so much more intense than the pleasure of spending it. So we overprotect. We self-insure to an extreme degree. And in doing so, we often deny ourselves things that would bring genuine joy or meaning. There's also something called mental accounting. We create mental categories for our money. Some money is for emergencies, some is for long-term care, some is untouchable. And once we've categorized money that way, it becomes very hard to reclassify it, even if the emergency never comes. Even if we could afford to move some of that emergency fund into discretionary spending, it stays locked in its mental box, labeled "Do Not Touch," and we carry it with us all the way to the end. Then there's the bequest motive. Many people want to leave something to their children or grandchildren, and that's a beautiful impulse. Generosity across generations is part of what makes us human. But sometimes the bequest motive is unconscious or unexamined. We hold on to money, not because we've made a deliberate choice to leave an inheritance, but because spending it feels wrong somehow. Like we're failing at something, or betraying our younger selves who worked so hard to save it. There's also an identity component here. For many of us, being a saver becomes part of who we are. I'm the kind of person who's responsible with money. I'm the kind of person who doesn't waste things. And those identities are valuable. They've served us well. But in retirement, we're being asked to shift from accumulation to decumulation, from saver to spender. And that can feel like becoming a different person. Someone less disciplined, less virtuous. Even when intellectually we know that's not true. Let me share something personal here. I'm 52, as I mentioned. I'm not retired yet, but I'm in that phase where I'm starting to think seriously about it. And I catch myself doing this. I look at my retirement accounts, and I think that number needs to be bigger. Even though I've run the projections, and they show I'm on track. Even though I know, intellectually, that I'm saving more than I'll probably need. I still feel this pull to keep accumulating, to add just a little more to the buffer. And I recognize it. It's precautionary saving, driven by anxiety. It's the fear talking. And the fear says, what if you're wrong? What if the projections are too optimistic? What if something happens? And those questions are hard to answer with certainty. So I keep saving. Even when what I might really benefit from is starting to practice a different relationship with money. One where I allow myself to use it, not just guard it. I'm telling you this not because I have it figured out, but because I think this internal tension is something many of us share. The question of when enough is enough, and how to shift from protecting to enjoying without losing our sense of responsibility. Another major factor in why we die with money we feared to spend is healthcare and long-term care. This is the wild card that keeps so many of us cautious. We've all heard the stories. Someone needs nursing home care, and it costs $8,000 or $10,000 a month. Within a few years, their savings are gone. Those stories are real, and they're frightening. So we prepare for them. We set aside money for potential long-term care costs. We budget conservatively in case we need extensive medical treatment. And that's prudent. But here's the thing. According to research, about 60% of people never need extended long-term care. They live independently until the very end, or they need only minimal assistance. And of those who do need care, many need it for a relatively short period. Yet almost all of us plan as if we'll be in the 40% who need significant care. Which means 60% of us are oversaving for a contingency that won't happen. Now, I'm not saying don't plan for healthcare costs. That would be foolish. But it's worth recognizing that the worst-case scenario, while possible, is not inevitable. And that our fear of it may be causing us to deprive ourselves unnecessarily. There's also what researchers call the "what if I need it" syndrome. It's the feeling that every dollar might be needed someday, so we can't spend any of them. It's a form of hoarding, but it's driven by anxiety rather than greed. And it's incredibly common. I've talked to people in their 80s who have $500,000 or more in the bank, and they still won't go out to dinner. They clip coupons, they buy the cheapest groceries, they deny themselves small pleasures. Not because they're stingy, but because they're terrified. Terrified of the unknown future expense that might wipe them out. And here's the heartbreak of it. Many of these people die without ever having felt financially secure. Even though they were. They had enough, but the feeling of enough never came. So let's talk about what enough actually means. Because this is one of the hardest questions in retirement planning. How much is enough? The technical answer involves calculations. Your expected expenses, your income sources, your life expectancy, your risk tolerance. You can run Monte Carlo simulations and get a probability of success. 90%, 85%, whatever it is. But the emotional answer is different. For some people, no amount feels like enough. Because enough isn't really about the number. It's about the feeling of safety. And if you grew up with financial instability, or if you experienced a major financial loss, that feeling of safety may be very hard to achieve. You can have $1 million and still feel vulnerable. Because the fear isn't rational in that sense. It's rooted in experience, in memory, in the stories we tell ourselves about money and survival. This is where financial planning and financial therapy intersect. Because sometimes what we need isn't a better spreadsheet. It's a different internal narrative. One that allows us to feel safe, even in the presence of uncertainty. One that gives us permission to enjoy what we have. Let's talk about the difficulty of shifting from accumulation to decumulation. Because this is really the heart of the paradox. For most of our adult lives, we're in accumulation mode. We earn, we save, we grow our wealth. The goal is simple: more. More in the 401k, more in savings, more equity in the house. And we get dopamine hits from seeing those numbers go up. It feels good. It feels like progress. We're winning at the game of life. But then we retire, and suddenly the game changes. Now we're supposed to spend. The goal is no longer to accumulate, but to use what we've accumulated. And that's a profound psychological shift. Because now, every withdrawal feels like losing. Even though intellectually, we know that's what the money is for. We watch the balance go down, and it triggers anxiety. It feels like we're doing something wrong. Like we're failing. This is compounded if the market is down. Selling shares in a downturn to fund living expenses feels terrible. It violates the rule we've internalized our whole lives: buy low, sell high. But in retirement, sometimes you have to sell, regardless of whether the market is high or low. And that creates a kind of cognitive dissonance. You're doing what you need to do, but it feels wrong. Then there's the comparison trap. We compare our retirement to others. We see friends who seem to be traveling constantly, or living in bigger houses, And we wonder, are they overspending, or are we being too cautious? It's hard to know. Everyone's financial situation is different, but we can't help but measure ourselves against each other. And that measurement often increases anxiety. If others are spending more, we feel either inadequate or envious. If others are spending less, we feel guilty or reckless. There's no winning. The other thing that makes decumulation hard is that we're doing it in public, in a sense. Our children are watching. Our friends are watching. And we don't want to be seen as irresponsible. We don't want to be the person who ran out of money and had to move in with their kids. That fear of being a burden is enormous. It shapes our behavior in ways we may not even realize. We'd rather deprive ourselves than risk becoming dependent. So here's what we've uncovered in this section. The paradox of dying with money we feared to spend is driven by several interlocking factors. First, precautionary saving and loss aversion make us overprotect our assets. Second, mental accounting locks money into categories we can't access psychologically. Third, bequest motives and identity as a saver make spending feel wrong. Fourth, fear of healthcare costs, especially long-term care, keeps us overly cautious even though most of us won't need extensive care. Fifth, the shift from accumulation to decumulation is psychologically difficult. It goes against everything we've been doing for decades. And sixth, we're afraid of being a burden, so we err on the side of extreme caution. All of this is understandable. It's human. And none of it means you're doing something wrong. But it does mean that many of us are living smaller lives than we need to. We're denying ourselves things that would bring joy, meaning, or connection. Not because we can't afford them, but because our fear won't let us. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I'm not advocating for reckless spending. I'm not suggesting you throw caution to the wind and hope for the best. That would be foolish. What I am suggesting is that there's a middle path between reckless spending and fearful hoarding. A path that involves thoughtful planning, realistic risk assessment, and self-compassion. A path that allows us to use our money in ways that align with our values. Not just in the abstract future, but now. While we still have our health, our energy, our relationships. Because here's a truth that's hard to face. Money is a tool, not a trophy. It's meant to be used, not just accumulated and admired. And if we die with substantial assets, having denied ourselves experiences and comforts we could have afforded, what was it all for? That's the question the paradox asks us. And it's a question worth sitting with. At 52, I'm starting to think about this differently. I'm asking myself, what is the money for? Is it just to reach some arbitrary number that makes me feel safe? Or is it to enable a life that feels full, connected, and meaningful? Those are two very different goals. And I think a lot of us have been focused on the first one without really examining it. We've been chasing safety. But safety at what cost? If the pursuit of safety means we never take the trip, never help the grandchild, never enjoy the nice meal, then are we actually safe? Or are we just existing in a smaller and smaller space, walled in by our own fear? I don't have perfect answers to these questions, but I think asking them is important. Because the alternative is to live on autopilot, to keep doing what we've always done, accumulating and protecting without ever stopping to ask whether it's still serving us. There's a concept in behavioral economics called the hedonic treadmill. It's the idea that we adapt to our circumstances and always want a little bit more. No matter how much we have, we feel like we need just a little more to be comfortable. And retirement savings can work the same way. You reach your goal, but then you revise it upward. You tell yourself, just another 50,000, and then I'll relax. But when you hit that, you move the goalposts again. And the feeling of enough keeps receding like a mirage. Breaking that cycle requires intentionality. It requires naming a number and saying, this is enough. And then honoring that decision. Even when your brain tries to revise it. Even when fear whispers that you need more. I think one of the most compassionate things we can do for ourselves is to recognize that this paradox exists. That many of us are caught in it. And that getting unstuck doesn't mean being reckless. It means being intentional. It means asking, what do I actually need? What do I want? What would bring me joy or meaning? And then creating a plan that allows for those things. Not someday, but now. While we're still able to enjoy them. Because the saddest part of this paradox isn't that people die with money left over. It's that they die with regrets. Wishes they'd taken the trip. Wishes they'd helped their kids more. Wishes they'd lived a little larger, a little bolder. Not recklessly, but fully. And by the time they realize that, it's too late. The health is gone, the energy is gone, the opportunity is gone. So the invitation here, and it's just an invitation, not a prescription, is to consider whether you might be holding on too tightly. Whether your fear, while understandable, might be costing you more than it's protecting you from. Whether there might be a way to use your resources more fully without being irresponsible. That's the balance we're all trying to find. In our next section, we'll hear from the experts. People who've spent their careers studying retirement income and longevity risk. And what they have to say might surprise you. Because the cutting-edge research suggests that the old rules, like the 4% rule, may not be the best approach anymore. There are new frameworks, new tools, new ways of thinking about this challenge. And some of them directly address the paradox we've been exploring. They're designed to give us both safety and flexibility, both prudence and permission. So let's take a moment to breathe. Part 5. What the experts tell us. Now we turn to the people who've spent their careers studying this question. Part 5. What the experts tell us. Now we turn to the people who've spent their careers studying this question. Researchers in retirement income, behavioral finance, financial planning. People like Pfau, Michael Kitces, Benz. These are names you might know if you follow this field. And if you don't, that's fine too. What matters is that these experts have looked at the fear of outliving money from every angle. They've analyzed the data, run the simulations, talked to thousands of retirees, and what they've learned can help us. Not with guarantees, because those don't exist, but with frameworks, tools, and perspectives that make this fear more manageable. So let's explore what they have to say. We'll start with something you may have heard of, the 4% rule. This rule has been the foundation of retirement planning for decades. But it's also been controversial and misunderstood. So let's look at where it came from and whether it still applies. The 4% rule was developed by a financial planner named William Benz in the 1990s. He analyzed historical market data going back to the 1920s. And he asked a simple question: what's the highest percentage of your portfolio you could withdraw in the first year of retirement, adjust for inflation each year after that, and still not run out of money over 30 years? Looking at the worst historical periods, including the Great Depression and the 1970s stagflation, he found that 4% worked. Even in the worst-case scenarios in US history, a 4% initial withdrawal rate, with inflation adjustments, would have lasted 30 years. So the rule became, if you withdraw 4% of your portfolio in year 1, and adjust for inflation each year, your money should last. It gave people a simple target. And for many years, it was considered the gold standard. But over time, experts have raised important questions about the 4% rule. Pfau, a retirement researcher and professor, has pointed out several limitations. First, the rule is based on US historical data. Other countries haven't had the same returns. So if you're relying on global markets, or if US markets perform differently in the future, 4% might be too aggressive. Second, the rule assumes a 50-50th stock and bond portfolio. If your allocation is different, the math changes. Third, it doesn't account for fees. In the real world, you're paying for management, for fund expenses. Those costs eat into your returns. Fourth, it assumes you want a 30-year time horizon and that you'll adjust for inflation every year like clockwork. But real life is messier than that. You might retire earlier or later than 65. You might live longer than 30 years. You might need to adjust spending based on circumstances. And finally, taxes. The 4% rule doesn't really address the tax implications of different withdrawal strategies. So while it's a useful starting point, it's not a guarantee. And it may not be right for everyone. Some experts now recommend lower safe starting rates for very risk-averse clients. Maybe 3 to 3.5% if you want near certainty. But that means living on less or needing a bigger portfolio. Other experts have developed variable withdrawal strategies where you don't stick rigidly to 4% adjusted for inflation. Instead, you adjust your withdrawals based on how the market is doing. If the market is up, you can take a little more. If it's down, you tighten your belt. This is sometimes called a guardrail strategy, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. There's also the income floor approach, which is championed by Pfau and others. The idea is to cover your essential expenses with guaranteed lifetime income. Social Security, pensions, maybe annuities. And then use your investment portfolio for discretionary spending. With that approach, you can be more flexible with the portfolio because your basics are covered. You're not relying on the market for survival. Let's talk about Pfau's Safety First framework in a bit more detail, because it directly addresses the fear we've been exploring. Pfau argues that most retirees are overexposed to market risk relative to their psychological comfort, meaning they have more of their retirement security depending on the stock market than they're emotionally prepared for. And that creates chronic anxiety. And his solution is to separate your expenses into two categories: essential and discretionary. Essential expenses are things like housing, food, utilities, basic health care. Things you absolutely need. Discretionary expenses are travel, hobbies, gifts, dining out. Things that are nice, but not survival level. Then you build a floor of guaranteed income to cover the essentials. Social Security is the foundation of that floor for most people. If you have a pension, that adds to it. And if there's still a gap between your essential expenses and your guaranteed income, you can consider buying an annuity to fill it. annuities have a bad reputation in some circles, and we'll talk about that. But the basic idea of converting some of your assets into guaranteed lifetime income makes sense psychologically, because it removes the question, what if I run out? If your essentials are covered for life, you can't run out in a way that threatens your survival. And that knowledge is profoundly calming. Then, for discretionary spending, you can use your investment portfolio. And if the market tanks, you cut back on discretionary spending. Not ideal, but you're not going to lose your home or go hungry. So the fear becomes more manageable. The psychological relief of income flooring is significant. Studies show that retirees with higher levels of guaranteed income report higher satisfaction and lower anxiety. Not necessarily because they have more money, but because they have more certainty. Certainty turns out to matter a lot for peace of mind. More than the absolute level of wealth, in some cases. Of course, building an income floor requires trade-offs. If you convert part of your portfolio into an annuity, that money is no longer available for other purposes. You can't leave it to your heirs, usually. You can't access it if you suddenly need a lump sum. So it's not right for everyone. But for people whose biggest fear is outliving their money, it can be transformative. Now let's turn to Michael Kitces and the concept of guardrails. Kitces is a well-known financial planner and researcher, and he's done a lot of work on dynamic spending strategies. The basic idea of guardrails is this. Instead of withdrawing a fixed percentage every year regardless of market conditions, you set upper and lower guardrails, upper and lower boundaries for your portfolio value. If your portfolio grows beyond the upper guardrail, you're allowed to increase your spending. You've succeeded, so you can enjoy it. If your portfolio drops below the lower guardrail, you have to cut spending. Not permanently, but until the market recovers. The brilliance of this approach is that it's pre-planned. You're not making emotional decisions in the moment. You've agreed in advance, if X happens, I'll do Y. So when the market crashes, you're not panicking. You're following the plan you made when you were calm. And that makes it much easier to execute. Guardrail strategies often allow for higher initial withdrawal rates than the traditional 4% rule. Sometimes as high as 5 or 5.5%. Because you're building in flexibility. You're willing to adjust spending up or down so you can afford to start higher. But there's a trade-off. You have to be genuinely willing to cut spending if the guardrails are breached. And that's not easy. It's one thing to agree to it in theory. It's another to actually do it when the market is down and you're being asked to spend less. But for people who can handle that volatility, guardrails offer a good balance between safety and flexibility. Kitces also talks about something called the spending smile. Research shows that retirees don't spend the same amount every year. In early retirement, spending tends to be higher. People travel, they have hobbies, they're active. Then in middle retirement, spending often declines. People slow down, they're more homebodies. And then in late retirement, spending can rise again due to healthcare costs. So if you graph it, it looks like a smile. Understanding this pattern can change your planning. You might front-load discretionary spending in your 60s and early 70s when you're most able to enjoy it, and plan for lower spending in your mid-70s and 80s, except for healthcare. That's different from the traditional assumption of constant inflation-adjusted spending. Now let's talk about annuities and mortality credits, because this is where the math of longevity risk gets really interesting. An annuity, in its simplest form, is a contract where you give an insurance company a lump sum and they pay you a guaranteed income for life, no matter how long you live. If you live to 100, they keep paying. The reason insurance companies can do this is something called mortality credits. Here's how it works. When you buy an annuity, you're entering into a pool with other people. Some of those people will die earlier than expected. Their payments stop, but the money they contributed stays in the pool. That money is then used to continue payments to people who live longer than expected. So in effect, the people who die early are subsidizing the people who live long. That's the mortality credit. It's the extra return you get from longevity pooling. And it's a big deal, because it means that a pooled annuity can support a higher lifetime income than you could safely generate on your own. If you're managing your own portfolio, you have to plan for the possibility of living to 100 or beyond, which means withdrawing conservatively. But in an annuity pool, the company only has to make sure the pool as a whole can meet its obligations. Not that every individual dollar can. So they can pay more to each individual. For someone whose biggest fear is outliving their money, this is exactly what they need. An annuity converts the unbounded worry of what if I live to 100 into a contractually guaranteed payment. You no longer have to worry about how long you'll live. Your income is guaranteed. Now annuities have downsides. First, they're often expensive. The fees and commissions can be high, especially for complex variable or indexed annuities. Second, once you buy one, your money is locked up. You can't access the lump sum anymore. If you need a big chunk of cash for an emergency, it's not there. Third, if you die early, you lose. The insurance company keeps whatever is left. Unless you buy a rider that returns something to your heirs, which costs more and reduces your income. And fourth, there's inflation risk. Unless you buy an inflation-adjusted annuity, which again costs more, your payments stay the same in nominal dollars. Over 20 or 30 years, inflation will erode the real value of those payments. So annuities aren't perfect, but for the specific problem of longevity risk, they're one of the few tools that directly addresses it. And Pfau and others argue that more people should consider them, at least for a portion of their assets. The key insight from the Safety First researchers is this. Most retirees would benefit psychologically from converting some of their portfolio into guaranteed income. Not all of it, necessarily, but enough to cover essentials. That way, market volatility only affects your lifestyle, not your survival. And that makes the fear more manageable. It's not about maximizing wealth. It's about optimizing peace of mind. And those are two different goals. Now let's talk about financial therapy. Because sometimes what we need isn't just better planning, but a different relationship with money. Financial therapists blend cognitive behavioral techniques with financial planning. They help people identify and challenge the scripts and beliefs they have about money. For example, you might have a money script that says, if I ever spend my principal, I'll be unsafe. That belief might have served you well during your accumulation years. But in retirement, it's keeping you from using your money. A financial therapist would help you examine that belief. Where did it come from? Is it still true? What would it look like to revise it? They also help people distinguish between realistic fears and catastrophic thinking. It's realistic to plan for healthcare costs. It's catastrophic thinking to assume you'll need the most expensive care for the longest possible time. Therapy helps you calibrate your planning to actual probabilities, not worst-case fantasies. One technique financial therapists use is visualization. They might ask you to imagine your retirement at different spending levels. What would your life look like if you spent 10% less, 10% more? And they ask, which version feels most aligned with your values? Not which feels safest, but which feels most true to who you are. Another technique is creating if-then plans. If the market drops 20%, then I will do X. If my health deteriorates, then I will do Y. These plans reduce the sense of helplessness. You're not just hoping things work out. You're preparing for contingencies. And that preparation, even if you never need it, is calming. Financial therapists also emphasize self-compassion. The goal isn't to eliminate fear. The goal is to make it proportionate. To align your decisions with your values, not just with your anxieties. and to give yourself permission to be imperfect. You're not going to make every decision perfectly. No one does. But you can make thoughtful decisions that honor both your need for security and your desire to live fully. Let's talk about Monte Carlo simulations. These are computer models that financial planners use to test retirement plans. A Monte Carlo simulation runs thousands of different scenarios. Different market returns, different inflation rates, different lifespans. And it tells you in what percentage of those scenarios does your plan succeed. So you might get a result that says 85% probability of success, which means in 85 out of 100 simulated futures, you don't run out of money. And in 15 out of 100, you do. These simulations can be helpful. They quantify risk in a way that's hard to do otherwise. They let you test different withdrawal rates, different asset allocations, different spending patterns, and they give you a sense of how much margin for error you have. But they can also backfire psychologically. Some people fixate on the failure scenarios. They see 85% success and hear 15% chance of disaster. And that 15% feels unbearable. They want 100% certainty. But 100% certainty doesn't exist in retirement planning. Not unless you have so much money that you could never possibly run out, which most of us don't. So experts like Kitces now recommend pairing Monte Carlo simulations with clear communication about what success and failure actually mean. Success doesn't mean you never have to adjust. It means you adjust thoughtfully when needed. Failure doesn't mean destitution. It means you might need to reduce spending, or rely more on Social Security, or make other changes. When people understand that, the failure probability becomes less terrifying. Another approach is to use risk-based guardrails, which we talked about earlier. Instead of reporting a single probability of success, you show what happens at different portfolio values. If your portfolio is here, you're on track. If it drops to here, you need to cut spending by 10%. If it grows to here, you can increase spending by 10%. That gives people a sense of control. They're not passively waiting to succeed or fail. They're actively managing their plan. Now let's turn to qualitative research. Interviews with retirees who successfully manage this fear. What do they have in common? First, they tend to have a clear budget. Not obsessively detailed, but they know roughly what they spend on essentials and what discretionary. Second, they keep 1 to 3 years of spending in safe assets, cash or bonds. So they're not forced to sell stocks in a downturn. That that buffer gives them psychological breathing room. Third, they know their minimum lifestyle. They've thought about, if things go really wrong, what's the basic standard of living I can accept? And they've made peace with that baseline. Not that they want to live that way, but they know they could if they had to. And that knowledge reduces catastrophic thinking. Fourth, many report that having some guaranteed income matters more than the absolute level of wealth. A person with $300,000 and a pension might feel more secure than someone with $800,000 and no pension. Because certainty matters. And fifth, they revisit their plan regularly. Not obsessively, but maybe once a year. They sit down and look at the numbers. Are we on track? Do we need to adjust? And that regular check-in prevents anxiety from building up. There's also a theme around naming the fear. Retirees who do well often report that talking about their fear out loud with a spouse or advisor or therapist reduces its power. When the fear is just in your head, it can grow unchecked. But when you say it out loud, it becomes something you can examine. Is this fear proportionate? What am I really worried about? What would help? And that conversation can be incredibly clarifying. Another common theme is valuing flexibility. We can tighten our belt if we need to. That sentence comes up a lot in interviews. People who feel secure aren't the ones who think they'll never have to adjust. They're the ones who know they can adjust if needed. That sense of agency, of having options, is protective. And finally, there's a focus on meaningful experiences, especially in early retirement. People who don't die with huge regrets are the ones who use their money for things that mattered to them. Travel, time with family, hobbies, learning. They didn't hoard out of vague dread. They spent thoughtfully on what they valued. Now let's talk about the role of Social Security, pensions, and guaranteed income more broadly. Because across the spectrum of experts, from Pfau to Kitces to mainstream planners, there's consensus on this point. Social Security is the foundation of retirement security for most Americans. It's inflation-linked, it's guaranteed for life, and it can't be outlived. And one of the most impactful decisions you can make is when to claim it. You can start as early as 62, but your benefit is reduced. You can wait until 70, and your benefit increases by about 8% per year you delay. For many people, delaying Social Security is one of the highest return, lowest risk things they can do. It's essentially buying more guaranteed lifetime income. And that directly reduces longevity risk. If you can delay claiming using savings to bridge the gap, you end up with a much higher floor of guaranteed income, which reduces the burden on your portfolio. For people who have pensions, the same logic applies. Pensions are guaranteed lifetime income, and they're incredibly valuable for managing this fear. Because no matter what happens to the market, the pension keeps coming. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer people have traditional pensions. That's part of why longevity risk has become such a personal burden. But if you do have one, recognize how valuable it is. And for those who don't, annuities can play a similar role. They're not as good as pensions in some ways, because they're not usually inflation adjusted, and you give up control of the principal. But they do provide guaranteed lifetime income. And for some people, that trade-off is worth it. The key insight is this: combining guaranteed income with flexible investment portfolios gives you both safety and opportunity. The guaranteed income covers your essentials, so you're not relying on the market for survival. And the portfolio provides upside and discretionary spending. Market volatility then mainly affects your lifestyle, not your security. And that makes the fear much more manageable. Pfau, Kitces, and others all advocate for some version of this combined approach. The details vary, but the principle is the same. Build a floor, then add flexibility on top. So what does a compassionate, expert-aligned framework actually look like? Here's a synthesis of what we've heard. First, define your essential and discretionary expenses. Be honest about what you truly need versus what you'd like to have. Second, build a guaranteed income floor to cover essentials. Use Social Security, delaying if possible. Add pensions if you have them. Consider annuities if there's still a gap and you can afford to give up liquidity. Third, use a dynamic, rules-based withdrawal strategy for the rest of your portfolio. Maybe guardrails, maybe a variable percentage, but something that adjusts based on market conditions and gives you pre-agreed triggers for action. Fourth, keep 1 to 3 years of spending in safe assets as a buffer, so you're not selling stocks in a crash. Fifth, revisit the plan annually. Look at the numbers, adjust as needed, and use that review as a time to check in with yourself emotionally too. How am I feeling about this? What's working? What's not? And sixth, give yourself permission to spend on what matters. Not recklessly, but thoughtfully. Within the plan, use your money for things that bring meaning and joy. This framework isn't perfect, but it balances prudence with permission, safety with flexibility. And it addresses both the mathematical and the emotional dimensions of the fear. I want to pause here and acknowledge something. All of this expert advice is valuable, but it can also feel overwhelming. Terms like guardrails and Monte Carlo simulations and income floors If you're not a financial professional, it might feel like too much. And that's okay. You don't need to become an expert yourself. What matters is the principle behind all of this, which is there are tools and frameworks that can help you manage longevity risk. You don't have to just save more and hope for the best. You can build a plan that addresses your specific fears and values. And if you need help with that, working with a good financial planner can be invaluable. Not all planners are created equal, of course. But a planner who understands both the technical and emotional sides of retirement can help you design something that works for you. The other thing I want to say is this. None of these approaches offer certainty. They offer thoughtfulness. They help you make better decisions with incomplete information, which is all any of us can do. The fear of outliving your money isn't going to disappear completely. Some level of uncertainty is baked into the human condition. But these tools can make the fear proportionate. They can help you distinguish between reasonable caution and paralyzing anxiety. And they can give you a framework for making adjustments as life unfolds. That's not nothing. In fact, that's a lot. So here's what we've learned from the experts. The 4% rule is a useful starting point, but it's not a guarantee and may need adjustment based on your specific situation. Pfau's safety-first approach emphasizes building a floor of guaranteed income to cover essentials, which provides psychological relief. Kitces' guardrail strategies allow for higher initial withdrawals with pre-planned adjustments, balancing flexibility and safety. Annuities and mortality credits offer a way to convert longevity risk into certainty, though they come with trade-offs. Financial therapy can help us examine and revise the scripts and beliefs that keep us stuck in fear. Monte Carlo simulations are useful, but need to be framed carefully to avoid amplifying anxiety. Retirees who manage this fear well tend to have clear budgets, safe asset buffers, realistic spending floors, and regular plan reviews. And finally, Social Security, pensions, and other guaranteed income form the foundation of retirement security for most people. The overarching message is this: you don't have to just live with this fear. There are evidence-based strategies that can help. And the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty, but to manage it thoughtfully. To create a plan that honors both your need for security and your desire to live fully. In our next section, we'll look at how we got here. The historical perspective. Because understanding the history of retirement and longevity risk helps us see our current situation more clearly. It gives us context. And context, as we'll see, can be deeply calming. So let's take a breath. Let your mind rest for a moment. and then we'll continue our journey together. Part 6. Historical Perspective. How we got here. One of the most calming things we can do when we're anxious about the present is to look at how we got here. History gives us perspective. It helps us see that what feels overwhelming and personal is often part of a larger pattern. And understanding that pattern can make our current situation feel less frightening. So let's look at the history of retirement and longevity risk. Because this fear we've been exploring, as intense as it is actually quite modern. It didn't always exist in this form. For most of human history, there was no such thing as retirement as we know it. People worked until they physically couldn't. And then they relied on family, community, or the church for support. The idea of leaving the workforce at a certain age and living independently for decades on saved wealth is very new. Retirement as a mass phenomenon is less than 100 years old. Think about that. Our grandparents' generation was among the first to experience anything like modern retirement. And even for them, it looked very different than it does for us. Social Security was created in 1935, during the Great Depression. It was designed to provide a safety net for elderly workers who could no longer earn a living. The retirement age was set at 65. And interestingly, life expectancy at birth in 1935 was only about 60 years. So most people weren't expected to live long enough to collect Social Security. It was meant for the survivors, not for everyone. But over the following decades, something remarkable happened. Life expectancy increased dramatically. Medical advances, better nutrition, safer working conditions. More and more people were reaching 65 and living well beyond it. And companies started offering pensions as a benefit to attract and retain workers. These were defined benefit pensions. You worked for a company for 20 or 30 years, and they guaranteed you a monthly payment for life. You couldn't outlive it. The company bore the longevity risk, not you. For a few decades in the mid-20th century, retirement looked pretty secure for people who had pensions. You had Social Security as a base, and a pension on top of it. You didn't need to manage investments or worry about withdrawal rates. The money just showed up every month. And while it might not have been lavish, it was predictable. That predictability created a kind of peace that many retirees today don't have. But starting in the 1980s, things began to shift. Companies started moving away from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution plans. The 401k was created in 1978, and it became the dominant retirement savings vehicle. Now, instead of a guaranteed monthly payment, you had an account balance. and you were responsible for managing it. You had to decide how much to contribute, how to invest it, and how to withdraw from it in retirement. Suddenly, longevity risk became a personal responsibility. You had to figure out how to make your money last. And if you got it wrong, there was no company pension to fall back on. At the same time, life expectancy kept increasing. People reaching 65 today can expect to live 15 to 20 years longer than they did a century ago. That's wonderful. It means more time with family, more opportunity to pursue interests, more life to live. But it also means funding more years. And with the shift from pensions to 401ks, that burden fell on individuals. So we're living longer retirements than previous generations, with less guaranteed income than they had. It's no wonder the fear of outliving money has become so intense. This is a structural change, not a personal failing. Our parents or grandparents may have had similar worries about money, but they didn't face quite the same existential question we do, because they had more certainty built into the system. There's also a cultural dimension to this shift. In earlier generations, multi-generational living was more common. If you ran low on money, you might move in with your children, or they might help support you. It wasn't ideal necessarily, but it was expected. Today, we value independence more highly. And that's not a bad thing. But it does mean we're expected to be financially self-sufficient for the entirety of our retirement. There's less of a safety net in family or community. So the stakes feel higher. If we run out of money, we're on our own. Or at least, that's how it feels. Now let's look at economic crises and what they teach us. Because understanding historical crises can be surprisingly calming. Not because they weren't painful, they absolutely were. But because they show us that economies recover, even when it feels like they won't. The Great Depression was catastrophic. The stock market lost nearly 90% of its value. Banks failed, unemployment soared. And for people who lived through it, the psychological scars lasted a lifetime. Many became extreme savers, never quite trusting the system again. But the economy did recover. It took years, but it happened. The 2008 financial crisis was severe too. The market dropped by more than 50%. People saw their retirement accounts cut in half. And for those who were already retired or about to retire, it was terrifying. Many delayed retirement. Some went back to work. But again, the market recovered. Within a few years, it had regained its losses and gone higher. The people who stayed invested, who didn't panic and sell at the bottom, came out okay. This doesn't mean market crashes don't hurt. They do. Especially if you're in retirement and drawing down assets. Sequence of returns risk is real. But what history shows us is that crashes are followed by recoveries. Every single time so far. And while past performance doesn't guarantee future results, it does provide perspective. There's something else history teaches us, which is that every generation worries about whether they'll have enough. Our grandparents worried during the Depression. Our parents worried during stagflation in the 1970s. We worry now. And our children will probably worry about their own versions of these questions. Financial anxiety is part of the human condition. But most people, most of the time, figure it out. Not perfectly, but adequately. They adjust, they adapt, they make do. And they survive. Knowing that doesn't eliminate the worry. But it does remind us that we're not alone. And that humans are remarkably resilient. Let's also consider how different cultures approach retirement and elder care. Because the American model of individual financial self-sufficiency is not universal. In many Asian cultures, multi-generational living is still the norm. Adult children are expected to care for their aging parents, not as a burden, but as a cultural value. In some European countries, there are stronger social safety nets. Public pensions are more generous. Healthcare is universal. So the individual burden of funding retirement is lower. I'm not saying one system is better than another. Each has trade-offs. But it's worth recognizing that the way we do retirement in the US is not the only way. And that our particular anxieties are shaped by our particular system. If we had more guaranteed income, we'd worry less about outliving our money. If we had stronger family or community support systems, we'd feel less alone in this. So some of what we're feeling is not inevitable. It's a product of choices we've made as a society. None of this is to minimize your fear. Your fear is real and valid. But understanding the historical and cultural context can help us see it a little differently. This isn't just a personal problem. It's a structural challenge that many people face. And that means it's not your fault. You didn't create this system. You're just trying to navigate it as best you can. And that's all any of us can do. So here's what we've learned from history. Retirement, as we know it, is a modern invention, less than a century old. The shift from pensions to 401ks transferred longevity risk from institutions to individuals. Longer lifespans mean we're funding more years than previous generations. Economic crises are painful but have always been followed by recoveries. Financial anxiety is universal across generations, and different cultures handle retirement differently, reminding us that our system is not the only possibility. All of this gives us perspective. It doesn't solve the problem, but it helps us see it more clearly. And clarity, even without certainty, is calming. Now let's bring this all together. We've come a long way tonight, and it's time to find our way to rest. Part 7. Closing. Finding peace with uncertainty. We've explored a lot tonight. The psychology of the fear of outliving our money. The statistics behind it. The paradox of dying with assets we feared to spend. What the experts recommend. And how we got here historically. It's been a journey. And if you're still with me, or if you're drifting in and out, that's perfect. There's no right way to listen to this. Just let yourself be here, in whatever way feels natural. So what have we learned? First, the fear of outliving our money is one of the most common anxieties in the second half of life. More people fear this than fear death itself. So if you feel it, you're in good company. Second, this fear is shaped by cognitive biases. Availability bias, recency bias, loss aversion. Our brains amplify the risk in ways that aren't always proportionate to reality. Understanding that gives us a little distance from the fear. Third, there's a profound paradox. Many people who fear running out of money die with substantial assets. They deprive themselves because of the fear, even when they could afford to live more fully. That tells us the fear itself is often the problem, not the actual risk. Fourth, there are practical tools and frameworks that can help. Income flooring, guardrails, dynamic spending strategies, annuities. None of them offer certainty, but they offer thoughtfulness. They help us plan in ways that honor both safety and flexibility. Fifth, this fear is modern. It's a product of longer lifespans and the shift from pensions to individual accounts. It's structural, not personal. And that means we're not failing. We're navigating a genuinely difficult situation. And sixth, history shows us that most people figure it out. Not perfectly, but adequately. They adjust, they adapt, they survive. And we will too. Now let me share what I'm taking from all of this as a 52-year-old looking ahead to retirement. I recognize that I'm caught in some of the same patterns we've talked about. The precautionary saving, the difficulty imagining spending down principle. The voice that says, just a little bit more, just to be safe. And I'm learning to question that voice. Not to ignore it completely, because caution has its place. But to ask, is this caution serving me, or is it just fear talking? Am I planning responsibly, or am I hoarding out of anxiety? Those are hard questions, and I don't always know the answers. But I'm also learning to ask a different question. What is the money for? Is it just to reach some number that makes me feel safe? Or is it to enable a life that feels meaningful, connected, and full? Because if I die with $1 million in the bank but I never took the trip, never helped the people I care about, never allowed myself to enjoy what I worked for, what was it all for? That question doesn't have a simple answer. But it's the right question. I'm also learning that safety and enjoyment don't have to be opposites. I can plan thoughtfully for the future while also being present in the now. I can build an income floor for essentials and still allow myself discretionary spending. I can save for worst-case scenarios without letting those scenarios dominate my thinking. It's a balance, and I won't get it perfect. But I'm trying to be intentional about it. To make choices that honor both my need for security and my desire to live fully. And to give myself compassion when I get it wrong. Because I will get it wrong sometimes. We all do. That's part of being human. Here's what I hope you take from tonight. First, you're not alone in this fear. It's universal, and it makes sense given the structure of modern retirement. Second, the fear itself may be costing you more than the risk it's protecting you from. Many people who worry the most end up depriving themselves unnecessarily. Third, there are tools and frameworks that can help you manage longevity risk more thoughtfully. You don't have to just save more and hope for the best. Fourth, perfect certainty is impossible. But thoughtful planning is very possible. And thoughtful planning, combined with self-compassion, can bring real peace. And finally, the question isn't just, will my money last? The question is, what is my money for? And that's a question only you can answer. If tonight's conversation has been helpful to you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel. And if you found value in what we've explored, a like helps others find this content. But truly, there's no pressure. You've already given me the gift of your time and attention, and that means more than any click. If you'd like to continue these conversations, I'm here. Every week, we explore another aspect of financial psychology for the second half of life. Not with hype or urgency, but with depth and calm. You're welcome anytime. Now, it's time to let your mind and body rest. You've taken in a lot of information tonight, and you don't need to hold on to all of it. Just let it settle, like sediment in water. What's meant to stay will stay. What's not will drift away. Let yourself get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull up your blanket, find a position that feels right. Let your eyes close if they want to, or let them soften their focus if you prefer to keep them open. There's no wrong way to do this. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out gently through your mouth. Again, breathing in and out. With each exhale, let a little bit of tension go. You don't have to force it. Just allow it. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw relax. Let your hands rest, palms open or gently closed, whatever feels natural. Notice the weight of your body sinking into the bed or chair. You're supported. You don't have to hold yourself up. If thoughts about money or retirement drift through your mind, that's okay. You don't have to push them away. Just notice them, like clouds passing in the sky. They're there, and then they're gone. You don't need to solve anything right now. This is not the time for planning or worrying. This is the time for rest. Let yourself have this moment of peace. Just this moment. Not the past, not the future. Just now. You've done enough for today. You've thought enough, planned enough, worried enough. For tonight, you can set all of that down. It will still be there tomorrow if you need it. But right now, you're free. You are enough. Just as you are, in this moment. With all your uncertainties and imperfections. You are enough. Your plans don't have to be perfect. Your savings don't have to guarantee every possible outcome. You are doing your best. And your best is enough. Let your breathing become slow and steady. In and out, like gentle waves on a shore. Each breath a little slower, a little deeper, a little more relaxed. If your mind wanders, that's fine. Gently bring it back to the breath, or let it wander. There are no rules here. Just rest. Tomorrow will come with its own challenges and opportunities. But tonight, you don't have to think about tomorrow. Tonight, you can simply be. Here, now, at peace. Thank you for spending this time with me, for trusting me with your attention and your thoughts. I hope you found something helpful here. Something that eases the burden, even just a little. Sleep well. Rest deeply. And may you wake tomorrow with a little more peace and a little less fear. Good night.